fast changing and in front of you.
Diplomatic perspective here on Global Television. My name is Michael. A pleasure to have you join us tonight. We'll extract some developments. Of course, there have been recent development to the recent protests, xenophobia attacks in South Africa on some immigrants, of course, who are also from Africans. There's been a lot of response from both the government of Ghana, government of Nigeria, and other countries in respect to all of that development. The president, Cyril Ramaphosa, also pleaded, with the people of South Africa to not take the laws into their hands. But a lot of reactions of people over the statement and what really all of this is to Africa. Joining us tonight is Marquett, a political commentator, joins us from the United States of America to extract some of these development, the spotlight in South Africa. Good to have you, Mr. Marquett, on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Give us an understanding. What is your view about all of that? Because some person will say this time this attack is an open attack. It's coming out publicly. People are coming out publicly. The vigilante group, so-called vigilante group, are coming out publicly to attack people, all in the name of getting illegal immigrant out of the country. Do you feel this is a welcome development as we speak?
It's one of the saddest things we've observed this year. The fact of the matter is that it's not about illegal immigrants, and in fact, it's not new. You can check on YouTube and see videos that are 11 years old from the BBC where Black South Africans are attacking other Blacks in their country whom they deem illegal. This is demonstrating to us that the South African is the most mentally colonized group of Black people on the planet Earth. And while the whites own 80% of their land and all of their economy, they focus on the poor Black person who came from Zimbabwe or who came from Congo or some other country. And instead, they claim it's like, these people are taking our resources. Well, not quite. The resources are in the hands of your merchant class, which are the Asians and the whites. These are other Black people in a similar position to you struggling, and you're struggling against them for crumbs instead of knowing that the steak dinner is on the table of your former colonizers, the ones who abused your grandmothers, and you're pretending as though you don't see them there controlling things still to this day. So this is a recurring issue, unfortunately.
Do you feel this has a negative impact in the continent as a whole? Because some persons feel, what is playing out is already in the international community. What does it speak towards about Africa's unity, Africa's image in the global stage?
It points out that Africa is still very disjointed. You have the United States of America, the European Union. You have the Gulf states cooperate on oil. You don't have enough meaningful cooperation among the African states, like, for example, the African Union. I think we're all waiting for them to come out and condemn this in a strong way. And that's been largely absent. They've been a bit quiet. And more importantly, we have to not only be able to condemn bad actors, but also to protect Africa as a whole. One thing that I find very strange and comical is that the Israelis, they have gotten nuclear weapons. They make sure that no one messes with them, and they're in a tough neighborhood. But the Africans who have suffered enslavement, colonization, we have no nuclear weapons at our disposal, and we allow all of the foreigners, the former colonial powers, to come in and still take our resources. And so for Pan-Africanism to be real at any level, we have to have more cooperation economically. Perhaps we can consider currencies. And we don't even see countries that have similar languages cooperating in an effective way, whether it's former, the Francophone countries or the Anglosphere. They're still not having significant ties. So what it shows us is, I think the word is Ubuntu. I perhaps can't pronounce it very well, but this idea of African brotherhood is mythological. And what's worse, even countries like, say, Benin, who said, if you have sub-Saharan blood, but you don't have citizenship at any country in Africa, you can come here. We applied, we did the data or the DNA ancestry, paid the money, and then they're like, nope, sorry, just kidding. And we'll keep your money. So we need governments in Africa that have real cooperation. We need military alliance to protect Africa from outsiders. And most importantly, we need identity. The blacks in South Africa have been living among the whites and admiring them, and now they're behaving like their white oppressor toward black people. So this is a very dark time in the continent of Africa, especially if we do not see African nation states sanctioning South Africa. Every single African government should put the harshest sanctions possible on South Africa. They should be pulling ambassadors. They should be pulling investment. South Africa should suffer greatly for this.
Do you feel, or do you think this is not about hunger? Because some of the groups, I mean, if you listen to some of the grievances, they feel that there are no jobs. They feel that the hunger level, I mean, is on the rise. They feel that the hospital facilities is not enough, to take care of the people. Go back to your country.
Well, what you'll notice consistently is that when you hear people, we can't call them xenophobes. We have to call them Afrophobes, right? They're not scared of people who shouldn't be there. The Chinese, the Asians, the Indians, the whites. It's about the blacks, right? So that's number one, we have to clarify. And number two, they never use data. So we'll hear these folks speaking about they're taking our jobs. Well, let's think about a couple things. Let's consider some data. So number one, in terms of wealth in South Africa, the median wealth of a white household is 1.4 million rand, whereas for a black household, it's 70,000 rand. So if you're trying to figure out where the money's at, it's not in the hands of someone who just got there from Namibia. It's in the hands of the white folks who own your land and your economy. That's where the money is. And I would even put to them that there are some other things that are far more important than that we have to consider, which are very strange in South Africa. For example, 1 in 5 black South Africans have HIV/AIDS. 1 in 5. That is staggering. That's your true emergency, South Africans. But then you say, we're all South Africans. Well, if we're all South Africans and we're equal and we're all a part of the same thing, why is it that 1 in 5, also known as 20% of black South Africans have HIV/AIDS, but in the case of whites, it's less than 1%. It's like 0.3 to 0.6%. I say all that to say this. There's huge disparities in wealth, disparities in land ownership, disparities in all asset categories, disparities in health. And what we have to be honest about is that it's not about money. It's about power. And it's about the fact that South Africans are scared to go at the current power holders. And instead they go for the easy target, the immigrants. And even if they won against the immigrants, they still would make no progress because they still are fundamentally in an apartheid economy. And it's actually quite sad that the South Africans gaslight and lie about what they're doing when we can see it on television. We have to fundamentally acknowledge that the South Africans are devils. And the reason that I say that, and this is no hyperbole, when you see black people, South Africans, go into a hospital and you have elderly women, you have sick people, and you're telling them to leave out while being sick from a hospital, you are a devil. And we can also see videos where South Africans are basically antagonizing children going into primary school. And it reminds me of the racist white majority in the United States in the 1960s when they wouldn't let black people get education. And there is no doubt that there's a great need for education throughout the world, but especially in a place like South Africa. And so many of the leaders, whether it's Dudula or it's that woman Jacinta, we never see them speak intelligently, use data, facts, and figures. It's all emotionalism because they've been confused and brainwashed. And this is not a new thing. I saw a video that was 11 years old about the same thing. South Africans were attacking blacks. And then I looked in the comments. I saw someone write 6 years later, oh, hey, I'm back. It's 2019. They're still doing the same thing. And I guess we have to go back in 2026 and say they're still doing the same thing they've not learned. And because of that, they must be punished harshly. The sad reality is that these people are bullies and you must meet force with force.
I mean, it's really a matter of concern because when you look at the fact that migration is a global phenomenon, it's not just what is related to Africa. When we see people living in Africa go to the West, but there's been I mean, the recent issues about countries saying putting their country first. You know, we've seen America saying America first. We've seen many countries and nations, you know, to say we are prioritizing a country. As a matter of fact, you know, some African countries have, you know, have been blacklisted. You know, way of coming into some countries. So, but
Yes.
now that speaks about a democracy in Africa, in a view, because in all of that, it boils back to the fact that when we do not have proper leadership, where we do not have, you know, things working in many nations in Africa, there's always bound to be this pressure. Do you feel that if African leaders get to fix the countries right, things will get better? You know, so that we'll stop. I mean, because in 2026, one will say we ought not to be at this stage where we are. You know, talking about, you know, some of these issues that are very, very, I mean, familiar with us for many decades.
You mentioned democracy, and I've heard it said before that democracy is just a form of government. It's not a magic bullet. And so Africa's biggest issue is not democracy. It's economics, it's education, it's political organization, and ridding these countries of corruption. And that doesn't mean that the West is not corrupt. My government, the United States, is extraordinarily corrupt. But we have enough wealth that the politician skimming off of the top does not destroy quality of life for the average person or even the lowest class so badly. So democracy is not the issue in Africa. The issue is, number one, identity, having authentic leaders who actually care about the population. Number three, stopping the foreigners from coming in and causing havoc. Whether we're talking about the Arabs, we see them active in Sudan. Whether we're talking about the Chinese, sometimes the Chinese come in and they do good things. Other times they come in and they deal with leaders who are not good managers of the economy. And these people accept predatory loans, and the Chinese take a port or a rail station or an airport as collateral. And those are not good deals.
We blame the Chinese. You will blame them.
No, they're coming in to do business. And it's based on the decisions of the Africans in terms of if that's going to be a good business deal. And I'll give you an example of something we could learn from Chinese history. You know, the Chinese, just a short time ago, they were not what they are today. They actually learned from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union helped them with ideology, because at the time they were like, you know, communists. But they also sent engineers and they sent builders to build in China, but also to teach them how to build. And so what we cannot do, and I've seen this in Kenya while I was on the ground, I've seen this in South Africa, I've seen this in Ethiopia. What we cannot do is allow the Chinese to come in and not only give predatory loans, but also have so many Chinese people come in, and I've seen this in Zambia as well, and the Chinese have their own police, and the Chinese are not showing respect to the native African population. And most importantly, they're not teaching. They must teach us how to build so that we do not have to rely on them for all time. And so we must remember that we have to develop ourselves. And that's why Africa has to act as a body, because if we don't, we'll have a situation like Zimbabwe. When Robert Mugabe was getting sanctioned in Zimbabwe, the reason his country couldn't get out of it is because the African continent could not collaborate in countering it. Whereas when you observe the Europeans, they move as one. The former colonial powers, they move as one. Africa must do the same thing. We should not be allowing the West to control our economies through sanctions, through currency manipulation, through forcing IMF and World Bank cooperation or submission. So it must be Africa for the Africans. And that's why when I refer to whites in South Africa, I refer to them as whites in South Africa. Because I tell you what, you go to Europe, you bump into somebody, they'll tell you, hey, go back to Africa. You're in Asia, they'll say, go back to Africa. You're in Latin America, they'll say, go back to Africa. You're in the United States, they'll say, go back to Africa. How is it you go back to Africa and you're still not home? That's what makes what's going on in South Africa so very heinous. We are human like everyone else. We should have a home. And if anywhere, we should be accepted in Africa, where our blood goes back into the land.
I mean, do you feel this about a constant repetition of history? Because a lot of countries are saying, look, I mean, South Africa, we had some help in history. We rendered some help for you. We had a lot of South Africans coming to the country, got scholarship. We had a lot of you, I mean, and all of that, you know, in aware of the fact that you must learn to history. So some persons are now pointing fingers and said, South Africa, do they have loose memories? Are they forgetting so soon what they might have actually gotten from other part of Africa? Now that gets me to the point of do you think that in aware of this vigilante group mobilizing themselves having a logo, having a group, they are coming out on the street proudly, jumping on the street, getting someone on the street, asking if they have a legal document to stay in the country. Are they, in a way, taking the laws into their hands?
They're absolutely vigilante groups, and the most disturbing thing is that there's no doubt that the South African government condones what they're doing, is allowing them to do it, and at times cooperating. You can see videos where the South African police are just standing there watching as though they don't have laws and courts. And what's more, the good news is that the world is changing in some ways for the better. And congratulations to the Nigerians. They have the largest refinery in sub-Saharan Africa. And that, I trust, will probably be an even better thing with the Strait of Hormuz being closed and cutting off part of the world's oil supply. The Nigerians must be respected. And I hope that strong countries like Nigeria, they behave as strong countries, not only strong militarily and in terms of population, but being a good moral force in the continent of Africa, and especially protecting their citizens, because we know that there have been Nigerians, there have been people from Ghana, people from Congo and other places that have been abused. And it is with the consent of the South African government. And the South African government benefits from this, and I'll tell you why. The truth of the matter is, if you're in a developed economy like South Africa allegedly is, and I remember flying in there, leaving the airport in Cape Town, and you see all these shanties, and it's only the blacks there. Then you get to Cape Town, it's all of the sun looks like San Diego. It's beautiful, $1 million properties, but everyone's white except me. And I say all that to say, those people living in those shanty towns, and the reason that they don't see any progress is because of the South African government. Their public compulsory education is obviously insufficient. It does not provide gainful skills for gainful employment. So this is why when you get an immigrant, the South African is competing with a low skill, low income immigrant for a job. If South Africa's developed economy did their job, then you wouldn't be competing with these immigrants. For example, I live in the United States. We get a lot of immigration. I've never once had a problem with immigration because I'm not competing with people coming from poor countries in Latin America. Why? Because I'm well educated and I can take advantage of higher opportunities in a developed service-based economy. And South Africa's government's failings are why they're allowing the South Africans to wrongly blame the immigrants, because it gets them from being under the microscope. The microscope that acknowledges you had load shedding because you couldn't manage your electrical grid. That's pathetic. They let them attack the immigrants because you forget that the South African government failed to protect the borders. If the government protected the borders, you wouldn't have these illegals inside of the country. So the South African government is extraordinarily guilty.
I mean, what we're talking about is about over 2.4 million legal migrants in South Africa. Yeah, there's some person said, oh, fine, we may have other illegal immigrants who probably are in the country. Do you feel that it's enough for government, for them to stand up to, be able to address this issue by, of course, restricting the vigilante groups in these harassments and attacks and fishing out who they call illegal immigrants into the country, other than this constant attack? Do you feel that there will be a way forward from the lengths of things you're seeing? Because at the end of the day, it will take the government of the day to get to do things. It will take the government of the day to sanction, to arrest, and whatever. As the case may be.
I don't see a solution under the current political structure in South Africa. It is. It's a very deceptive matrix that operates in that country. I remember many years ago, my first time in South Africa, and mind you, I've had employees in South Africa. I've been there many times. I've been all over the country. And I remember the very first time I was there and I saw an EFF, rally, and I became more familiar with Malema. I'd studied him before I showed up because I was going there to do business and invest. And I wanted to know the nature of the country. And I found that, initially they're supposed to be revolutionary, and then they get into office and now they're just a part of the establishment, and they maintain the existing power structure over time ever since the end of apartheid. So South Africa actually requires a real revolution, an authentic revolution. And we've seen that these xenophobic or Afrophobic attacks have been going on for more than a decade. So why would it change now if the nature of government has fundamentally not changed? And I would even further that the South Africans are being fooled. They're being fooled by many actors in government, even Malema, who sometimes says things that are seemingly good. I remember when Uganda was putting forward a law against sexual deviance, and we Africans have values. We do not promote sexual deviance. And Malema wrapped a rainbow flag around himself and protested the Ugandans putting up a law to protect the morality of their country. And I thought, gee, that's very strange. And I'll tell you why it's particularly strange, because that's a white colonial mentality. The idea that you're not even in that country, but you're trying to control and dictate what goes on in another African country, especially when you're trying to control and dictate that they follow European or Western values, because those are not African values. And we can observe the laws of the 55 countries of Africa to validate that. But here's what you really need to understand about how little the South African government cares about the South African people. Malema was promoting LGBTQ. South Africa, 1 in 5 South Africans have HIV/AIDS. If you look at transmissibility of that deadly disease, the homosexuality is the leading cause. You'd be 20 times more likely to transmit it male to male sexual intercourse. So why would he promote something that gives you a 20 times increase in this deadly disease? That's because they don't care. And when I'm there in Camps Bay, when I'm there in Maboning and Joburg, when I'm there in Durban at the beach, I never see any public health announcements to stop this pestilence in the land. The government fails on education. They fail on health care. They fail on protecting the borders. The government does not care about the South African, but as long as they can confuse the blacks to fight against the blacks, the government will never be addressed, and the whites will maintain control from the as a puppeteer and in the background, invisible. And the reason they're invisible is because they don't live among the blacks. They live where people are wealthy.
I mean, this really leads to about a lot of advocate for some calls for immigrants and foreigners in the country, in which is really about economic when you look at some of those things. I mean, because when we look at the right of immigrants, of course, or foreigners, as the case may be, is enshrined within the provisions of the United Nations enshrine, even with the conduct of the African Union, all of that is getting to play out in this. That speaks about if AU really have the capacity, the balls, or what it takes, to jump. Because if the rights of immigrants, the rights of foreigners, are being infringed in some countries like South Africa, it gets to speak that. They are now, now giving them the powers or the vigilante powers to do whatever they want to do. That mob is being decided to who they want to stay in the country, or not.
Well, the truth is that no international body can have impact unless they have military. And we see that right now with the behaviors of the American administration. They kind of do what they want, whether the UN, agrees or doesn't agree, that they do what they choose. And that's because the UN does not have an army that they can call in to stop it. Similarly, the African Union, they've been quite quiet, but they don't have an army to go in and stop the South Africans from doing what is occurring. And that is why countries like Nigeria, which shall be the superpower in Africa, that is why countries like Nigeria, A, need to get things together, and B, they need to project power effectively. And just one note, and I have the utmost respect for the Nigerian people. In fact, I have SAS in Africa, an organization that's all about Africa, and it's headquartered in Nigeria, in Lagos. But the key is the Nigerians cannot allow the power of a Donald Trump or these foreign entities to go into Nigeria as though the Nigerians cannot manage their own affairs. And until we can keep the outsiders out, maintain our sovereignty and our own power, and then when appropriate, project it across the continent, not until then can we truly say that there's a such thing as international human rights. Not until then can we stop hate crimes occurring within the borders of some countries. And truth be told, I think South Africa will forever be a unique case, right? Because they have that significant white population that's still dominating the economy. And here's the funny thing, when you think about the blacks versus the whites, and it's like, well, what have the blacks learned over time? Donald Trump falsified a claim that whites were being eliminated in South Africa. This was completely untrue. And he created a program to extract them and give them opportunity. And he even brought the president of South Africa into his White House, showed him like fake evidence, and then chastised a grown man, a head of state, just like he was a child. And the head of state of South Africa like stood there and like behaved like, he was a colonial subject, which is an embarrassment to the entire continent, especially South Africa. Now, you would have to ask yourself, where do we see a black nation rescuing black people wherever they may suffer on earth? Where do we see a black nation or a black leader bringing to account a white troublemaker and saying, hey, you did this and we condemn you, and you never see it. It's like we don't have self-respect. And that is why we must condemn every single South African wherever we see them, at whatever level they be. This is including the Trevor Noahs, until they speak up and do something. Every South African is guilty. And we must lay the hammer on them, because what they're doing is egregious. And most importantly, they're lying about it. I've gotten at least 100 death threats. I did 2 million views on the video speaking out against this. South Africans send me death threats, or they say, oh, you don't understand. What is the likelihood that I don't understand? What is there to understand about grown men, Zulus, and the organization Dudula trying to block children from going to school? What is there to understand? How complex is it to understand that you're kicking old women out of hospitals? There's nothing to understand. You're doing wickedness, and you should pay for that.
A lot to unpack in some of these issues coming from South Africa. Marquett Burton is an author and a political commentator. Thanks so much for joining us here on Global TV, the Diplomatic Perspective tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, everyone. Of course, it's really a developing situations. We have seen what leaders are doing to arrest all of these situations. Some countries are speaking out in getting this matter resolved, and of course, advising some, of course, of some of the migrants in the country to take heed as well. But eyes are watching, and of course, international community as well are putting eyes closely, looking at the situations unfolding in South Africa. That's the size of a show tonight on Diplomatic Perspective. I'm Edikan Michael. See you again.